This will destroy the future of every Australian family. And right now, there's nothing they can do to stop it. Australia is in the midst of the largest wealth transfer in its history, a devastating shift of wealth from young people to the older generations, from renters to landlords, and from Australians to foreign investors. An entire generation is being locked out of the prosperity that their parents once took for granted. The average Australian home now costs 9 times the average salary. Rent eats up a third of most families' income, and young Australians are forced to choose between owning a home or starting a family. It's about to get much worse, because what's coming isn't just unaffordable housing. It's an economic collapse on a scale Australia has never seen before. It's a perfect storm of foreign debt, demographic collapse, and political failure that will leave millions of families financially ruined. And the worst part? Australia is the last developed nation to realize it has sold its future to the highest bidder. This is no longer a question of if, but when Australia faces its economic ruin. And when you see the numbers, you'll understand why the situation is far worse than anyone dares admit. Let's break it down. On paper, Australia looks incredible. It ranks as one of the wealthiest countries in the world, with a median wealth per adult of $268,000 or roughly 410,000 Australian dollars. In fact, 1 in 10 Australians is considered a millionaire in USD terms. This is the image of prosperity that Australia projects to the world. But here's the truth. Most Australians can't access that wealth. More than half, 53% of household wealth, is tied up in real estate values. Another massive chunk sits in superannuation funds that can't be touched until retirement. And after stripping away housing bubbles and forced retirement savings, Australia's actual prosperity looks far less impressive. The reality? Australia's per capita GDP growth over the last decade was a meager 1.1% annually. In fact, it's among the lowest in the developed world. Real wages have either flatlined or even fallen when adjusted for the rising cost of living. Productivity growth is sluggish at best. While Australians feel wealthy on paper, they're broke in practice. And that's exactly how the system was designed, to make the country look prosperous while most of its citizens struggle. Australia's housing market isn't just broken, it's a scam, a massive wealth transfer from everyday Australians to speculators, both domestic and foreign. Since the 1970s, house prices have exploded by over 3,400%, while wages have only risen by 80 to 100%. The result? House prices are now 13 to 15 times the median income in cities like Sydney, worse than New York, London, or San Francisco. An entire generation has been locked out of home ownership. The average first-time home buyer is now 36 years old, and it's getting harder every year. 3 out of 5 renters, 60%, expect to rent for life and never own a home. The government's response? Silence. The once great home ownership rate of nearly 70% is now projected to fall below 63%, the highest rate of decline in the developed world. But here's the insidious part. This didn't happen by accident. It was engineered. Australia's tax system incentivizes property speculation. The negative gearing loophole allows wealthy investors to write off rental property losses against their income tax, making it easier for the rich to outbid ordinary Australians. Capital gains tax exemptions also let property investors enjoy substantial discounts on profits, while foreign investors poured billions into Australian real estate. In 2023 alone, foreign investors contributed $15 billion to Australian real estate, but the damage was already done. Homes are now investment commodities, not places for families to live. If you think the housing crisis is the only problem, think again. Australia's household debt has skyrocketed to 182% of annual income, one of the highest ratios in the world. On average, families owe nearly twice their annual earnings, mostly in mortgages. This excessive debt leaves Australian households exposed. If interest rates rise any further, or if the economy stumbles, millions of Australians could default on their mortgages, sending the country's banking system into chaos. The scary part? Most Australians have no idea how precarious their situation really is. Rising interest rates are already crushing heavily indebted families, and an economic shock would push them over the edge. How does Australia hide its stagnation while pretending to grow? Simple. Immigration. In 2022 to 2023, Australia added over 500,000 people through net overseas migration, the highest rate in the developed world. On paper, this looks great. More people means more consumption, higher demand for housing, and a boost in GDP. But it's nothing but a house of cards. While immigration may provide short-term economic benefits, it only exacerbates the housing crisis. The flood of new residents needs somewhere to live, but housing construction can't keep up. In 2024, the nation built just 177,000 new homes, while demand was for 223,000. Basic supply and demand flood the market with buyers while constraining supply, and prices go through the roof. As a result, rents have soared and housing prices continue to climb, pushing the dream of homeownership further out of reach. Australia's birth rate is now 1.48 children per woman, well below the replacement rate of 2.1. This means the country is relying more and more on immigration to maintain its population. But the financial stress of unaffordable housing has led many young couples to delay having children or abandon the idea altogether. Fertility clinics report that financial stress is the leading cause of delayed childbearing, and relationship counselors see couples breaking under the pressure of impossible housing costs. In fact, many young Australians feel like failures for not being able to provide basic security for their families. This demographic time bomb, coupled with the country's housing crisis, creates a grim picture for the future. Despite the mounting crisis, Australia's political system has shown little interest in meaningful reform. Why? Because many politicians and business leaders are part of the problem. Australia's political class is made up of property owners. The Prime Minister, housing ministers, and opposition leaders all own multiple properties. Every policy that drives up property prices also drives up their personal wealth. It's hard to expect change when those in charge have so much to lose. The system is rigged, and the people who should be leading the resistance are trapped within it themselves. Australia's economic model isn't just socially unsustainable, it's environmentally damaging as well. Rapid population growth, driven largely by immigration, puts immense pressure on the country's natural resources and fragile ecosystems. Land clearing, water shortages, and increasing pollution are just a few of the challenges exacerbated by uncontrolled urban sprawl. With more people comes more demand for housing, more demand for water, and more strain on a system that is already buckling under the weight of its own unsustainable development. Urban centers like Sydney and Melbourne have seen rapid growth, but the infrastructure to support this population growth simply isn't keeping pace. Water supply issues are becoming more critical, with many regions already facing chronic shortages. The environmental costs of overdeveloped urban spaces are becoming impossible to ignore, a short-term solution to a long-term problem. The wealth divide in Australia has never been wider. The richest Australians continue to get wealthier, benefiting from skyrocketing property prices and a booming stock market. Meanwhile, working-class families struggle to make ends meet, burdened with debt, rising living costs, and stagnant wages. In 2023, the top 1% of income earners in Australia controlled over 20% of the nation's wealth. Meanwhile, the bottom 50% holds just 8% of the nation's wealth. This growing inequality is not just economic, it's social. The gap between the rich and poor is widening, with fewer opportunities for upward mobility. It's not just the housing market driving this divide, it's the systemic policies that reward the wealthy while leaving the middle and lower classes to fight for scraps. Tax policies that favor capital gains, regressive tax structures, and a lack of meaningful labor protections are ensuring that the rich continue to accumulate wealth while ordinary Australians fall further behind. If you think this crisis is isolated to Australia, think again. This is a global issue. In Canada, the UK, the US, and beyond, housing prices are at unsustainable levels. Young people are locked out of home ownership, unable to compete with foreign investors and speculators. But Australia is ahead of the curve in terms of what's coming next. Economic collapse. The country is too dependent on its mining industry and foreign capital, and when commodity prices fall or the housing bubble bursts, the entire economy will be exposed. The final blow will be the simultaneous collapse of the housing market, the banking sector, and the mining exports, creating a perfect storm that will drag the nation into economic turmoil. The real estate bubble could burst, property values could plummet, and the middle class could evaporate in a matter of months. Australia's situation is dire, but it doesn't have to be this way. The policies that led to this crisis were choices. Choices made by political elites who prioritize short-term gains over long-term sustainability. But the reckoning is coming, and when it does, Australia will not be able to escape the consequences of its own choices. The future of the nation hangs in the balance, and unless significant reforms are made soon, Australia will be remembered as the lucky country that sold its future to the highest bidder. The question is no longer if Australia can survive this crisis, but whether it can reverse course before it's too late.